It was a dark and stormy night when Jake, a hitchhiker, found himself on Route 66. He had been walking for hours trying to get to the next town before nightfall, but the storm had slowed him down, and he knew he wouldn't make it. As he trudged along the deserted highway, Jake heard the sound of an approaching car. He stuck out his thumb and hoped for a ride. The car slowed down and pulled over, and Jake hurried over to the passenger side. The driver was an older man with a weathered face and deep-set eyes. He didn't say much, but Jake was grateful for the ride. As they drove along, the storm intensified and the wind howled through the windows. Suddenly, the driver turned to Jake and said, "Do you know, son, this is where it happened?" Jake looked at him quizzically. "What happened?" "The accident," the driver replied. "The one that claimed the lives of my wife and son." Jake could sense the driver's pain and grief. He didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent. As they continued down the dark and winding road, Jake noticed that the driver's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He seemed to be lost in thought, reliving the accident. Suddenly, the car swerved off the road and came to a stop. The driver turned to Jake, his eyes wild with fear. "We're not alone out here," he said. "I can feel it. Something's watching us." Jake looked out into the darkness, but he couldn't see anything. The storm was still raging, and the rain was coming down in sheets. "We have to go," the driver said, his voice urgent. "We can't stay here." Jake nodded, and they both got out of the car. As they walked along the side of the road, the driver kept looking over his shoulder as if he was being followed. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise behind them. They turned around and saw a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. The driver started running, and Jake followed close behind. They ran for what felt like hours until they finally reached a small town. As they caught their breath, Jake turned to the driver and asked him what had happened back on the road. The driver looked at him with haunted eyes. "I don't know," he said, "but every year on the anniversary of the accident, I feel like I'm being watched. And every year something tries to drag me back to that spot." Jake didn't know what to say. He thanked the driver for the ride and watched as he drove off into the night. As he walked through the town, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He looked around, but he couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, he heard a voice whisper in his ear, "You shouldn't have come here, Jake." He turned around, but there was no one there. He walked faster, his heart pounding in his chest. When he finally made it to his destination, he locked the door behind him and sat down on the bed, still shaking from his encounter on Route 66. He knew he would never forget the eerie feeling of being watched, and he would never forget the haunted look in the driver's eyes. It was a night he would never forget, and one he hoped he would never experience again.